Denver, Colorado, 1880. The city smelled like wet boards and coal smoke when the rain came, and like dust and cheap whiskey when it didn't. Either way, Denver never stopped moving. Wagons creaked over ruts, horses snorted under street lamps, and men with money in their pockets walked as if the ground had been laid down for their convenience. Mattie Silks watched them from the shadowed doorway of her current place, respectable enough to keep the law polite, notorious enough to keep it profitable. The parlor downstairs was loud with laughter, but above it, in her private room, the world became quieter and far more honest. That was where men confessed, not only their desires, but their debts, their grudges, their plans. Mattie listened the way other people prayed. Tonight she wasn't listening. Tonight, she was counting. She sat at her desk beneath a frosted lamp, its light pooling across a ledger and a folded city map. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty, adding columns, circling figures, drawing small, precise boxes around what mattered. Rent, repairs, staff wages, the quiet bribes the city preferred to call fees, profit, loss, the invisible cost of being dependent on anyone else. A knock came at the door, soft, familiar. "Miss Silks?" Her house manager, Ada, called through the wood. "You asked to be told when the broker arrived." Mattie's pen paused. "Send him up." Ada's footsteps faded down the hall. Mattie folded the map once more and slid it into a drawer. Then she rose, smoothed the sleeves of her dark dress, and turned toward the mirror, not to admire herself but to confirm what she already knew. Her face was composed. Calm was not an emotion for her, it was a tool. When the broker entered, he carried his hat in both hands like a man holding a fragile truth. His name was Elwood Parr. He smelled of damp wool and nervous ambition. He was young enough to still believe the city could bruise him, and smart enough to know it already had. "Miss Silks," he said, voice tight. "Thank you for seeing me." "You said the property was unusual," Mattie replied, motioning him to the chair across from her desk. "Unusual usually means trouble, or opportunity. Which is it?" Parr swallowed. "Both." He unfolded papers, deeds, sketches, a thin packet of notes in tidy handwriting. "It's a house," he began. "Not in the district proper, but close enough to draw the right clientele. Holiday Street. Big lot, 2 stories, a carriage entrance in back. The kind of place a respectable family would have wanted 10 years ago." "And now?" Mattie asked. "Now it's empty," Parr said. "Because the last owner, well..." He stopped. Mattie did not rescue him with encouragement. Silence did what it always did. It forced a man to finish his thought. "The last owner was Reverend Talmadge," Parr said finally. "He bought it with donations, promised a boarding school. Then the money disappeared. The girls never arrived. The congregation turned on him. He ran." Mattie's mouth curved faintly. "Denver has a talent for exposing liars." Parr's cheeks reddened. "The house has rumors." "Rumors are just stories looking for a buyer," Mattie said. "Show me facts." Parr tapped the papers. "The price is low because no one wants to touch it. The neighbors complain. The city pretends not to notice. But you..." He hesitated, then tried again, more carefully. "You have a reputation for making difficult properties profitable." Mattie's gaze stayed steady. "Bring a carriage. I'll see it tonight." Parr blinked. "Tonight?" "If I wait until morning," Mattie said. "Someone else will sell the fear first." The rain had thinned to a mist by the time they reached Holiday Street. Denver's lamps flickered behind them like distant warnings. The neighborhood here was quieter, the buildings spaced wider, the air less thick with noise. A row of cottonwoods moved in the breeze, whispering secrets to each other. The house sat back from the road behind a fence that had once been painted white. Now the paint peeled like sunburn. The windows were dark. The roof sagged slightly at one corner. Still, the structure held a stubborn dignity, as if refusing to admit it had been abandoned. Mattie stepped from the carriage and felt the earth's cold dampness through her boots. She didn't carry a pistol openly the way some women in Denver did. She carried something more dangerous: certainty. But tonight, out of habit, she had a small revolver tucked under her shawl. Not because she expected a gunfight, but because she never expected safety. Parr produced a key and struggled with the lock. His hands shook. "You're afraid of the house," Mattie observed. "I'm afraid of what people say about it," Parr corrected. "That it's cursed." Mattie leaned in, voice low. "People only curse things they want kept cheap." The lock clicked. The door opened with a sigh, releasing the smell of old wood, damp plaster, and the faintest trace of perfume that had no business lingering in an empty place. Inside, the entry hall stretched long, with a staircase rising to the second floor and a corridor leading deeper into shadow. Parr lifted a lantern, its flame trembling. Mattie took one slow step, then another, letting her eyes adjust. She saw the bones of the house first: wide rooms, high ceilings, thick walls. She saw the layout with an instinct that belonged to a builder and a strategist, not a dreamer. A parlor that could hold men who wanted to be seen. A smaller sitting room where men could believe they were alone. A rear room with a door that led to the backyard, useful for quiet arrivals and quieter exits. Parr spoke softly, as if afraid to wake something. "The Reverend planned classrooms here, dining room there." Mattie walked past him. "He planned virtue," she said. "I plan control." She moved from room to room, touching nothing, noticing everything. The wallpaper was faded, the floorboards scuffed, but the windows were large enough to catch light, and the walls were solid enough to muffle sound. Upstairs, the hall ran long, with 6 rooms branching off it. 2 had fireplaces. 1 had a balcony. Mattie paused at the balcony doors and pushed them open. The night air slipped in, cool and wet. She stepped out and looked across the city. Denver's lights were distant here, scattered like coins spilled on dark cloth. The wind carried faint laughter from somewhere far away. She imagined, with unsettling clarity, what this place could become. Not simply a brothel, a fortress, a house that belonged to her, where rent could not be raised and landlords could not threaten. A place where she could shape the rules down to the last hinge and lock. Behind her, Parr cleared his throat. "So, what do you think?" Mattie turned. In lantern light, her face looked carved from calm. "I think," she said, "that this house is hungry." The next morning, Parr returned with a contract. Mattie did not sign it immediately. She read every line, every clause, every attempt to hide a blade in legal language. When she found one, she circled it and pushed the paper back. Parr's throat bobbed. "That's standard." "It's standard for men who assume women won't notice," Mattie said. "Fix it." He did. They met again that afternoon in a small office above a bank, where the air smelled of ink and nervous respectability. The banker, Mr. Wainwright, wore gold spectacles and the expression of a man who wanted profit without scandal. "Miss Silks," he said, polite in the way a fence is polite, firm, not friendly. "This is an unusual transaction." Mattie smiled faintly. "Denver is an unusual city." Wainwright cleared his throat. "A home like this? Perhaps you intend to rent it to a family?" Mattie's gaze did not blink. "Perhaps." The banker's eyes narrowed. "I must consider the reputation risk." Mattie leaned forward just enough to make the lamp's light catch her eyes. "Then consider the profit," she replied. "This house will be paid for in 2 years. In 5, it will be worth twice the price. Your bank will take its interest and pretend it never knew my name." Wainwright's lips thinned. "And if the city objects?" "The city objects in public," Mattie said. "In private, it collects fees." Wainwright looked away, as if checking the corner of the room for morality. Then he nodded once. "Very well." The papers were signed by dusk. When Mattie left the bank, the street smelled of autumn and wet stone. Ada waited near the carriage, eyes bright with worry and excitement. "Did you do it?" Ada asked. Mattie climbed in and let the door close behind her, shutting out the city's noise. "I bought a house," she said. Ada exhaled. "And now?" "And now," Mattie replied, "we make it ours." Transforming the house was not an act of decoration. It was an act of engineering. Mattie hired a carpenter who didn't ask questions and paid him extra not to. She hired a locksmith who had been fired from the city courthouse for making keys too easily. She hired a seamstress who understood that drapes were not simply fabric. They were barriers, moods, signals. The first week, she did not change the furniture. She changed the bones. New locks on every door. A second latch inside her office. A peephole in the stairwell. Heavy curtains in the downstairs parlor to soften streetlight and hide faces. A service passage from the rear room to the carriage entrance, so clients could arrive discreetly when discretion mattered. She installed a bell system. Thin wires hidden along baseboards, so Ada could alert Mattie if trouble entered the house. She had the cellar cleared and reinforced, not for storing bodies, as rumors might suggest, but for storing supplies and records that did not belong in public view. Then she addressed the rooms. Downstairs she created a parlor with warmth and distance. Velvet chairs, low lamps, mirrors placed to reflect light but not reveal too much. She hated mirrors that made women look like commodities. She preferred mirrors that made men feel observed. In the smaller sitting room she placed a reading table, a chessboard, a shelf of respectable books. She wanted certain clients to believe they were visiting culture, not vice. Men with influence often needed permission to be hypocrites. Upstairs, she converted bedrooms into suites, each with its own character. One soft and pale, one darker and intimate, one with a balcony for men who wanted to feel romantic while lying to themselves. Throughout the work, the neighbors watched. The neighbor to the left, Mrs. Dyer, was a widow who wore morality like a bonnet. She stood at her fence each afternoon, lips pursed, eyes judging every plank carried through Mattie's gate. One morning, Mrs. Dyer approached, hands folded as if holding prayer. "Miss Silks," she began, voice trembling with righteous purpose. "We've heard you purchased this property." Mattie stepped onto her porch, calm as stone. "Yes." Mrs. Dyer's eyes flicked toward the house. "We hope you intend to restore it to respectable use." Mattie let the silence stretch until Mrs. Dyer's certainty began to fray. "This neighborhood values decency," the widow continued. Mattie's smile was polite. "So do I." Mrs. Dyer frowned. "Then you'll assure us—" "No," Mattie said gently, cutting the sentence cleanly. "I won't assure you anything. Assurances are promises, and promises make people careless." Mrs. Dyer's cheeks reddened. The city," Mattie replied, "has been collecting money from the district for 20 years. If it wants to pretend it is shocked, it may do so, but it will do it with its hand out." Mrs. Dyer stared, offended and afraid. Then she stepped back as if Mattie had revealed a weapon. As she walked away, Mattie called after her, voice mild. "If you'd like the property values to rise, Mrs. Dyer, I suggest you stop scaring away the workers." The widow did not turn around. Ada, watching from the doorway, murmured, "You enjoy making enemies." Mattie's eyes stayed on the retreating figure. "I enjoy making boundaries." Rumors began within days. Men at saloons spoke of Mattie buying a preacher's failed dream. Women at markets whispered that the house was cursed, that the reverend had hidden sins in its walls. The district's other madams took notice in the way predators notice a new scent. One evening, a visitor arrived without invitation. Her name was Lark Delaney, and she ran a house 3 streets away, closer to the district's heart. Lark wore a blue dress that looked expensive, and a smile that looked sharper. She entered Mattie's parlor with the confidence of someone who expected the room to belong to her. Mattie met her at the center, hands relaxed, posture straight. "Mattie," Lark said, voice sweet. "I heard you bought yourself a churchman's failure." "I bought myself a future," Mattie replied. Lark's gaze traveled across the room, taking stock of the new curtains, the placement of lamps, the lock on the rear door. "You're expanding." "I'm securing," Mattie corrected. Lark smiled wider. "Expanding means competing." Mattie's gaze did not shift. "Competing implies we want the same thing." And we don't? Lark asked. Mattie walked past her slowly, letting Lark feel watched. You want attention, Mattie said. I want control. Attention is loud. Control is quiet. Lark's smile tightened. Careful. Quiet things can be taken. Mattie stopped and turned. Only if no one hears the footsteps. Lark's eyes narrowed. For a moment the air was pure tension. Two queens measuring each other, deciding if today was a battle or a truce. Then Lark laughed softly. All right, keep your house. But remember, Denver is full of men who hate being outplayed by a woman. Mattie's voice stayed calm. Then they should stop playing. Lark left as she had come, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and threat. Ada exhaled when the door closed. Was that a warning? Mattie looked down at her ledger on the desk. It was an introduction. The first real test came before the house even opened. It arrived in the form of a letter, delivered by a boy who wouldn't meet Mattie's eyes. The envelope carried no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat and confident. Miss Silks, the neighborhood has standards. So does the city. You will sell the property within 10 days. A friend. Ada read it aloud, her voice tight. Who would send that? Mattie took the paper, studied the ink, the spacing, the deliberate lack of signature. She didn't need a name. She understood the type. A man with influence, used to speaking without consequence. Someone who believes he can buy silence with fear, Mattie said. Ada swallowed. Do we tell the police? Mattie's smile was thin. The police will ask who paid me to complain. Then they'll ask how much to stop asking. She folded the letter, placed it in her black ledger's pocket, and rose. Get par, she said. I want to know who else looked at this house before I bought it. Ada nodded and hurried out. Mattie went upstairs to her office. In the drawer beneath her map, she kept a second list, names of men who owed her favors, who had said too much in her presence, who believed they were untouchable. She ran her finger down the list slowly, stopping at one name. Deputy Marshal Kavanaugh. Not a saint, not a fool. A man who enjoyed order because it made him feel powerful, but who also enjoyed money more. Mattie put on her coat and left the house in the early evening, the sky bruised purple over Denver's roofs. She found Kavanaugh in a saloon near Union Station, drinking whiskey as if it were medicine. He looked up as she approached and smiled with practiced warmth. Miss Silks, to what do I owe the honor? Mattie sat without waiting to be invited. Someone wants me to sell my new property, she said. Someone who thinks the city's standards are a weapon. Kavanaugh's smile faltered slightly. And I want to know whose standards those are, Mattie replied. He studied her. You're asking me to cross people. I'm asking you to do what you already do, Mattie said, voice low. Listen. Watch. Tell me who is moving money behind curtains. Kavanaugh's eyes narrowed. That's dangerous. Mattie leaned in just enough. So is being in debt to me. Silence stretched. Then Kavanaugh exhaled and looked away, as if pretending he hadn't decided. There's a man, he said finally. Councilman Reddick. He's been pushing to clean up the district. Publicly. Privately, he's been buying properties around it through intermediaries. Wants the land cheap before the rails expand. Mattie's stomach tightened with a cold understanding. So, he threatens me to force a sale, she said. Kavanaugh nodded. And if you refuse? He'll make trouble, Mattie replied. Inspections, noise complaints, morality campaigns. Kavanaugh shrugged. That's politics. Mattie stood. Then I'll remind him what politics costs. Kavanaugh's eyes followed her. Careful, Mattie. Men like Reddick don't like being reminded by women. Mattie's smile was faint. Then he should choose a woman who forgets. 3 nights later, Councilman Reddick came to her current house. He arrived with 2 men in clean coats, as if he were touring a business. His hair was slick, his mustache trimmed, his smile designed for audiences. Mattie received him in her private room above the parlor. Ada remained just outside the door, listening. Reddick sat without being offered. "Miss Silks," he said, voice smooth. "I hear you've purchased that unfortunate property on Holiday Street." "Unfortunate for whom?" Mattie asked. Reddick chuckled. "For the neighborhood. For the city. It has aspirations for improvement." Mattie's gaze stayed steady. "I have aspirations too." Reddick's smile tightened. "Be reasonable. Sell the property. I will ensure you receive a fair return." Mattie leaned back. "You can't afford fair," she replied. One of his men bristled. Reddick lifted a hand, still smiling. "Let's not be dramatic." Mattie's voice remained calm. "Then don't be threatening." Reddick's eyes cooled. "You misunderstand. This is guidance." Mattie nodded slightly, as if considering. "I have some guidance for you," she said. "Stop buying Holiday Street through intermediaries. Stop pretending virtue while you count profits from vice. And stop sending unsigned letters." For the first time, Reddick's composure slipped. "Who told you?" "Men talk," Mattie replied. "They always do." Reddick recovered, but his voice sharpened. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Mattie's eyes flashed in lamplight. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," she said. "A man who wants my property and thinks my reputation makes me weak." Reddick's smile vanished. "You will sell," he said quietly, "or the city will make your life difficult." Mattie stood. "The city has already made my life difficult," she replied. "That's why I'm good at this." Reddick rose too, anger controlled but real. "Don't mistake your little empire for immunity." Mattie stepped closer, close enough that her perfume might have reached him, but not close enough to be touched. "Don't mistake your position for cleanliness," she said softly. "If you want a war, councilman, I suggest you choose an opponent who can be shamed. I cannot." Reddick stared at her, then turned sharply and left. His men followed, faces tight. Ada entered a heartbeat later. "That was a beginning," Mattie said. Mattie opened the house on Holiday Street 1 month later. She called it Velvet House, not to advertise softness, but to suggest the kind of luxury men believed they deserved. Invitations were not printed. They were spoken. A select group of clients received quiet notes delivered by trusted hands. The first night, rain returned, as if the sky had decided to bless her timing. Carriages rolled up to the back entrance, wheels hissing through wet earth. The doorman, hired from a boxing ring because he understood boundaries, checked names and faces. Inside, lamps glowed low and warm. Music drifted from a small piano in the corner, played softly enough to soothe without becoming a performance. Mattie stood at the edge of the parlor, watching. Her girls moved through the room with practiced ease, greeting clients with calm smiles and attentive eyes. Laughter rose and fell, cards shuffled. A man in a fine coat leaned toward another and spoke too softly, forgetting that walls could listen. Mattie's house was working exactly as she intended. Then, near midnight, Ada approached with a subtle stiffness. "There's a gentleman asking for you," Ada murmured. "He won't give his name." Mattie's stomach cooled. She nodded once. "Bring him upstairs." In her office, the man waited by the window. He was tall, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, dressed well without vanity. His hat was in his hand, damp from rain. When he turned, his eyes were gray, steady, assessing, not hungry. "Miss Silks," he said. "You know my name," Mattie replied. "I don't know yours." He smiled faintly. "I know more than your name." Mattie did not move. "Then speak." The man stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said. "I'm an investor." Mattie recognized the name, not from gossip, but from patterns. Rail money, water money, the kind of influence that shaped cities quietly. "I don't entertain business in this room," she said. "I'm not asking for entertainment," Hale replied. "I'm asking for a conversation." Mattie studied him. About what? Hale's gaze flicked toward the ledger on her desk. About Holiday Street, he said, and the men who want it. Mattie's eyes narrowed. You're working with Reddick. Hale shook his head. I'm watching him, he said. Because men like him don't build, they take. Mattie felt a spark of interest she did not welcome. And you? She asked. Hale's mouth tightened. I build, he replied. Then quieter. But building requires choices. Some of them are ugly. Mattie held his gaze. Why come to me? Because Reddick won't stop, Hale said. And because you don't scare easily. Mattie's smile was faint. Fear is expensive. I spend it carefully. Hale stepped closer, still not crossing the line of her space. He'll use the city against you, Hale warned. Inspections, raids, newspapers. He'll pretend it's morality. Mattie's voice stayed calm. Then I'll remind the newspapers what hypocrisy pays. Hale's eyes sharpened. You think you can win this alone? I think I can survive it alone, Mattie corrected. Hale exhaled. I don't want him to win, he said. Because if he wins, men like him will learn they can take property by threatening women. Mattie felt something in her chest shift. Not softness, not surrender. Recognition, the way one strategist recognizes another. And what do you want? She asked. Hale hesitated, then chose honesty. I want you to let me help, he said. Mattie's gaze narrowed further. Help comes with strings. Hale nodded. Sometimes, he admitted. But not all strings are chains. Rain tapped the window like a patient warning. Mattie turned slightly, looking out at the dark yard below, where her house glowed warm against the night. She thought of her locks, her bell wires, her hidden ledger. She thought of Reddick's smile. She thought of how Denver celebrated men who seized and condemned women who refused to be seized. Then she turned back to Hale. Help, she said, is earned, not offered. Hale met her gaze. Tell me how, he replied. Mattie picked up her black ledger, opened it to a blank page, and set it between them. Then we begin, she said, by writing down what no one once remembered. Over the next weeks, Thomas Hale became a quiet presence in Mattie's world. He did not arrive like a customer. He arrived like a man stepping into a storm, knowing he could be struck and choosing to stand anyway. Sometimes he came to warn her of a city inspection scheduled suspiciously early. Sometimes he brought her a rumor of Reddick's newest purchase. Sometimes he simply sat in her office and spoke like a man who had forgotten how to be human outside of contracts. Mattie listened, and as she listened, she learned something about Hale that complicated her sense of him. He was not a savior. He was a man with his own interests, his own ambitions. But he was also a man who seemed haunted by the kind of power he carried, the way it could bend lives without ever touching them. One night, after a particularly tense visit from a city inspector who had found nothing but still promised to return, Mattie poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one toward Hale. You've been in my office 10 times, she said. You've never asked for more than conversation. Hale took the glass but did not drink. If I asked for more, he said, it would be hard to know whether I meant it or the room did. Mattie's eyes flicked to him. That's the most honest thing a man has said in this house, she replied. Hale's mouth curved slightly. Then perhaps I'm learning. Mattie felt the pull again, the dangerous one. Not desire exactly. Not romance in the cheap sense. Something deeper. A recognition of shared loneliness. 2 people who held power in different ways and understood that power rarely came with peace. She set her glass down untouched. Don't mistake honesty for permission, she said. Hale nodded. I won't, he replied. But his eyes lingered on her face a heartbeat too long, and Mattie felt the heat of it like a lamp turned higher. Reddick escalated. A newspaper editorial appeared describing immorality creeping into respectable neighborhoods. The writer did not name Mattie, but the hints were obvious. The next day, Mrs. Dyer stood at her fence with a cluster of neighbors, their faces tight with righteous anxiety. Ada came upstairs with the newspaper, lips pressed. They're trying to stir the neighborhood, she said. Mattie read the editorial, then folded the paper carefully. "Good," she said. Ada blinked. "Good?" "They've shown their hand," Mattie replied. "Now we show ours." That night, Mattie hosted a dinner, not a party, not an invitation to vice, but a respectable meal served in her downstairs sitting room. She invited 3 city officials, 2 bankers, and 1 newspaper editor whose debts were large enough to make him polite. She invited them under the pretense of discussing property improvements and community stability. They arrived cautious, curious, and hungry, for food, and for the thrill of being in a place they pretended to condemn. Mattie greeted them with perfect courtesy. She served good wine. She spoke about street repairs. She praised the neighborhood's potential. She listened carefully as they spoke, and she noted every small hypocrisy like a coin dropped into a purse. Then, near the end of the dinner, Thomas Hale arrived. Not as her escort, not as a customer, but as a man whose presence made the room straighten itself. Hale shook hands with the officials. He spoke to the banker as if they were equals. He smiled at the editor with a quiet warning in his eyes. Mattie watched the shift in the room and understood. Influence was contagious. If she could attach her house to men like Hale publicly enough, the city would hesitate to attack her too aggressively. Hypocrisy had limits when it risked embarrassment. After the guests left, Ada exhaled. "That was clever," she whispered. Mattie stood by the window, watching their carriages roll away. "Clever is just careful with better timing," she said. Hale remained, lingering near the doorway. "You used me," he said, not accusing, observing. Mattie turned. "You offered help," she replied. "Help is used." Hale studied her. "And if I wanted it to be something else?" he asked quietly. Mattie's pulse stayed steady, but the question landed like a small, sharp blade. "If you want something else," she said, "you'll have to prove you can want without taking." Hale's breath caught, then released. "I can try," he said. Mattie held his gaze. "Trying is not winning," she replied. Hale nodded once. "Then I'll keep trying," he said. The climax came in early winter, when the city's air turned thin and cold, and breath rose in pale clouds. A city raid was scheduled. Mattie learned of it through Kavanaugh, who owed her more than he admitted. The raid was meant to be theatrical, a moral performance in front of reporters. Reddick wanted the neighborhood to see action, to feel justified in pushing Mattie out. Mattie did not panic. Panic was for people who had not prepared. She closed the house for one night, announced it as maintenance. She moved sensitive records to the cellar behind a false wall. She ensured her girls were safely away. She left only a few staff members, just enough to appear normal. Then she waited. The raid came at dusk. Boots on the porch, a hard knock, voices calling authority into the air. Mattie opened the door herself. The lead officer was Captain Sloan, a man who enjoyed the sound of his own commands. Behind him stood 2 reporters, eyes bright with appetite. "Miss Silks," Sloan announced loudly, "we have reason to believe illegal activities are being conducted on this premises." Mattie's voice was calm. "Then I'm sure you'll be disappointed," she replied. Sloan pushed past her. Officers flooded in, searching rooms that had been stripped of anything incriminating. They opened drawers, lifted rugs, peered behind curtains. The reporters scribbled, disappointed by the lack of scandal. In Mattie's office, Sloan found her black ledger on the desk. He reached for it. Mattie's hand moved, fast, controlled, closing the book before his fingers touched it. "That," she said, "is private." Sloan's eyes narrowed. "It's evidence." Mattie smiled faintly. "It's my property," she corrected, "and you have no warrant to seize it." Sloan's jaw tightened. The city," a voice said from the doorway, "is about to embarrass itself." Thomas Hale stepped in. He wore a dark coat, his posture composed, his eyes cold with authority. Behind him stood Councilman Reddick, unexpectedly pale. He had not planned to appear in person until Hale insisted. Sloan stiffened. "Mr. Hale," he said, suddenly polite. Hale did not look at him first. He looked at Mattie. "Are you harmed?" he asked. No, Mattie replied. Hale nodded once, then turned to Sloane. Captain, he said, you are raiding a property that is under review for unlawful political interference. Sloane blinked. What? Hale stepped forward, producing papers. Federal inquiry, he said. Signed. Dated. Valid. The reporter's eyes widened. Their pencils moved faster. Reddick's face tightened, trapped between fury and fear. Mattie understood in an instant. Hale had done something costly. He had pulled official attention toward Reddick's property schemes. He had made the raid dangerous not for her, but for the man who had orchestrated it. Sloane stammered. We were acting on instruction, Hale said, voice flat. From a councilman who has been purchasing land through intermediaries while publicly condemning the district's existence. The reporters turned sharply toward Reddick. Reddick's voice rose. This is outrageous! Mattie stepped forward, calm as ever. She opened her black ledger and turned to a page she had prepared weeks before. She held it up, not to the officers, but to the reporters. Names, she said. Dates, payments, not enough to convict, enough to ask questions. The room shifted like a living thing. The raid was no longer a performance against vice. It had become a performance exposing power. Reddick's eyes flashed with hatred at Mattie. You can't, he hissed. Mattie's smile was thin. I already did, she replied. Hale stood beside her, shoulders squared. He did not touch her, but his presence was a shield. Sloane cleared his throat. Captain, an officer murmured. We should leave. Sloane hesitated, then snapped. Clear out. Boots retreated. The reporters lingered, hungry for more, then rushed out to write what they had witnessed. In less than 10 minutes, the house was quiet again. Only Mattie, Hale, Ada, and Reddick remained. Reddick's composure shattered. You think you've won, he spat. You're still what you are. Mattie's eyes did not blink. And you're still what you are, she replied. The difference is, everyone can see it now. Reddick turned to Hale, voice trembling. You betrayed me. Hale's gaze was cold. I stopped you, he corrected. There's a difference. Reddick's face twisted. He looked at Mattie once more, then stormed out, his boots loud in the hall, as if trying to reclaim authority through noise. When the door slammed, silence returned like snow. Ada exhaled shakily. Is it over? Mattie closed her ledger. It's never over, she said. But it's quieter now. Hale remained still, his expression strained. I may have made enemies, he said. Mattie looked at him. You already had enemies, she replied. You just pretended they were colleagues. Hale's mouth tightened, then softened. I did this for you, he said, voice low. Mattie's gaze held him steady. Did you do it for me? She asked. Or did you do it because you couldn't stand what you were becoming? Hale's breath caught. He looked away, then back. Both, he admitted. Mattie's heart moved in a way she didn't fully approve of. She hated softness. She respected honesty. She stepped closer, stopping just short of contact. Then remember this, she said quietly. If you want to stay in my orbit, you don't get to use love as leverage. Ever. Hale nodded. I won't, he said. A pause stretched between them, thick with what wasn't said. Outside, the wind moved through cottonwoods like distant applause. Mattie lifted her hand and, for the briefest moment, touched the back of Hale's fingers. Light, deliberate, a choice. Go, she said softly, before you mistake this room for permission. Hale's eyes searched her face. Then he nodded once and left. When the door closed, Ada whispered, Do you trust him? Mattie stared at the lock, thoughtful. I trust what he did, she replied. Trust is built from actions, not promises. Spring arrived slowly, like a reluctant confession. Reddick survived the scandal. Men like him often did, But his influence cracked. He was forced to sell some of his properties publicly. The neighborhood's moral outrage cooled when it became inconvenient. Mrs. Dyer stopped gathering neighbors at her fence when she realized the city's officials now visited Mattie's house with careful politeness. Velvet House thrived. It thrived because Mattie had built it for more than profit. She had built it as a machine of discretion and control. Men came there to be seen, to be hidden, to be forgiven, to be lied to kindly. They talked, they confessed, they bragged. They failed to notice that the house itself listened. Mattie did not become softer with success. She became more precise. Cortez came and went like weather, sometimes charming, sometimes cruel, never fully stable. Mattie learned to keep her heart behind a locked door, even when she allowed him inside the building. Thomas Hale visited occasionally, always with restraint, always as if testing himself. Their relationship did not become a simple romance. It became something rarer in the West, a bond negotiated by respect. One evening, months after the raid, rain returned. Mattie stood on the balcony upstairs, looking over the yard where lamps glowed and carriages waited. Hale stood beside her, hands on the railing, not touching her. "You built a fortress," he said quietly. Mattie's gaze stayed on the city lights. "I built a home," she corrected. "A fortress is just what outsiders call a home they can't enter." Hale turned to her. "What do you want now?" he asked. Mattie's mouth curved faintly. "To keep what I've built," she said, "and to make certain the city remembers who paid for its comfort." Hale nodded, as if understanding the weight of that. Below them, Denver continued, restless and hungry. The West was still the West, full of gunfire and ghosts, ambition and betrayal. But on Holiday Street, behind velvet curtains, a woman who had once been a farm girl with no protection but her instincts now held a deed in her name and keys in her pocket. She had bought a house. Then she had turned it into power, and power, once built, was the one thing the West never forgave, but always respected. In the weeks that followed, the threats didn't vanish. They changed shape. A permit request delayed, a patrol wagon lingering too long at the corner, a column of gossip printed and retracted. Mattie answered each pressure the same way, with paperwork, patience, and a smile that never showed teeth. When a nervous young clerk suggested she could avoid complications by selling, she brought him tea and asked for his supervisor's name. Complications, she reminded him gently, were for people without receipts. On a soft April evening, she stood alone in the downstairs parlor after the last carriage left, listening to the house settle. The piano lid was closed, the lamps turned low. She ran her fingertips along the banister she'd reinforced and felt the solid certainty beneath the polished wood. For the first time in years, she did not feel rented. She felt owned by herself. Before the city could fully decide what it thought of Velvet House, Mattie discovered why the Reverend had fled so quickly. It happened when a warped baseboard was pulled loose in the upstairs hall. Behind the plaster was a narrow cavity and a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Mattie waited until the house was silent, then opened it under her lamp. Inside were letters, bundled, dated, and damning. Names appeared like ghosts in ink. Councilman Reddick, Captain Sloan, a banker who smiled too politely at church. Beneath the letters was Reverend Talmadge's list of payments, amounts matched to reasons. The house had been built on blackmail long before Mattie arrived. That night, Thomas Hale returned with winter in his eyes. "They'll regroup," he said. "Reddick won't forgive humiliation." "I don't need forgiveness," Mattie replied, and slid a bundle of letters across the desk. Hale read, jaw tightening. "This is dynamite." "It's insurance," Mattie said, "and a warning." Hale set the papers down carefully, as if sound alone might ignite them. "If you use these, the city will burn." Mattie's voice stayed quiet. "Then the city should have chosen honesty when it was cheaper." For a moment, Hale hovered on the edge of a question he didn't know how to ask. Finally, he spoke anyway. "What am I to you in this?" Mattie looked at him, steady, unblinking. Be a man who can stand near power, she said, and not mistake it for ownership. Hale's breath caught. Then he nodded once, accepting the boundary like a vow. Mattie closed the tin box and locked it away with her ledger. Outside, Denver kept churning, hungry and loud. Inside, Velvet House settled around them, wood and velvet and new locks, breathing like a place that had finally found its owner. Mattie Silks didn't ask the West for permission. She bought the door, she made the keys, and when the city came knocking, she decided what it would find.